What happened to my father? I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, Mark!
What's going on, everyone? It's Alex. Welcome back to the channel. Moon Knight episode 5 is about to come out, and even though it's supposed to focus on Mark Spector, episode 4 really set up Layla's character as well for a huge future in the MCU, so let's break it all down, including all of the Scarab references. If you like the video, consider giving it a thumbs up. It really helps out the channel. Other than that, let's get into the video. Let's go. So Layla El-Fuli is a new character in the MCU in the same way that Sylvie was a combination of Enchantress and Lady Loki. And in short, Layla is the same way. She is the modernized version of Marlene, who is Mark's love interest in the comics. How she bridges the comics and the show, though, will likely be through her father, who we find out was murdered in episode 4, in which he pretty much died the same way as he does in the comics. Royal Bushman, who is Mark's mercenary companion and who we are about to see in episode 5, is of course that same person who committed the murder and also shot Mark that night as well. Her father's name was Abdullah El-Fuli. Now in the MCU he was an archaeologist, but in the comics he was an Egyptian hero known as the Scarlet Scarab. His name was Abdul Faul, so it's a bit of an adaptation change of the names as you can see, but he is the original Scarlet Scarab who sought after the Ruby Scarab, and the Ruby Scarab is in fact that artifact MacGuffin that we see in the Moon Knight show. He also sought after the Eye of Horus, which was a big talking point in episode 4 as it led them to the direction of Alexander the Great's tomb. More on that in a bit though. So the Ruby Scarab is what gave the powers to the holder. The Scarab grants superhuman strength, flight, durability, and all sorts of other mystical abilities. It's a pretty powerful object that Abdul's son in the comics ends up inheriting, and who also becomes a more prominent character with ties to Thor. The Scarlet Scarab is even seen as a potential owner by the Eye of the Agamotto at one point, so he, or should I say, the Mantle, is not just a useless character, and there's a bunch of connections to Thor that I'll discuss later in the video. Most people assume that the Scarab only works as a compass, which is true since we have only seen it like that in the show, but I believe there is something else hidden within the Scarab, and maybe Layla is the key to unlocking its true power, which in the end could help save Mark. Beetles or scarabs represent resurrection, and there was even an Egyptian god Khepri who was in fact the god that was represented as a scarab. So in ancient Egypt, since the sun was believed to die each night and reborn each morning as a beetle, the scarab took significant regenerative powers. Egyptians believed that the deceased needed to harness these powers to reborn in the afterlife, in the same way that the sun was reborn or resurrected each morning. So this is what makes every Scarab Easter egg important, especially the opening scene of episode 4, which is the very first thing that we see in the episode is a Scarab crawling up the little sand dune after Steven passes out. And of course this is meant to represent the rising of the Scarab, or should I say Layla. Then of course we see Donna holding one in the facility that Mark wakes up in, and this is actually the same beetle plush toy that Donna tells Steven to put away in episode 2. There's even more Scarab Easter eggs throughout, but you get the point. The Scarab is important, but it's not just about Amit's tomb. If you also think about the Ruby or Scarlet Scarab, Ruby and Scarlet are both shades of red. Layla has now used a red flare 3 times in the past 2 episodes, and even her eyeshadow is a purpley red tint. So it could be nothing, but to me these are definitely more Easter egg references to the Scarlet Scarab. I believe that Layla knows more about the Scarab than we're led to believe, and it's likely why she's so concerned about it in episode 2. Sure, it leads to Amit's tomb, but it's also an important family artifact, and in the same way that Abdul's son in the comics is told about the Scarab, I believe that Layla was also, but the only difference is she needs to find the reasoning to awaken its true powers. Which would definitely fit in the MCU, as we've seen that a few times already. Now when she's had it in the show, we know she doesn't have any enhanced abilities just by holding it, which in the comics you would. But knowing that Amatou Shapti is now in possession of Harrow, I'm starting to wonder if he just leaves it behind because to him it was just a means to find the tomb. We do know that there is an actress who will be playing Amit at some point in the series, so her appearance is inevitable, and I'm willing to bet that when Amit is brought back, something happens to the Ruby Scarab artifact that they have been holding on to. I know in the Lemire run, Mark comes back a bit different, but if you want to see my breakdown on that comic, check out the link in the description below, but it's also possible the Scarab helps resurrect Mark aside from Amit. I mean, the possibilities of what's about to happen are endless, but I do think that Layla will be a reoccurring character in the MCU with powers by the end of this show or eventually in the future. Because if Oscar Isaac does in fact not want to do that many Marvel projects, because he said he never signed a long-term contract, could Layla be the one that we see in smaller or spin-off stories when Mark isn't around? Perhaps we even see an encounter with the Power Broker in Madripoor, since it's clear that Layla does some sort of underground painting heist, which would make her an interesting enemy for Sharon Carter in her new place, so it's very possible. There are a lot of Scarlet Scarab and Thor connections. In the comics, the first appearance for the Scarlet Scarab was actually in a Thor comic, issue number 326. Now in this story, the Scarlet Scarab just wanted to return the Eye of Horus that was stolen in Cairo by thieves who eventually wanted to sell it. So as he embarks on this mission, he ends up coming across the museum curator who made a deal with Thor to stop him from getting it. Eventually they fight, but in the end, Thor joins him and they return the eye to its place. The two of them were allies after this, and although this is a complete stretch, I'm starting to wonder if Layla and Thor will ever cross paths because of this connection. Especially knowing how gods are now becoming more important and will be in Love and Thunder along with Gore. Or does her connection to Thor possibly set up a Thor Corps in the MCU, which is a notable squad of Thor-like characters or variants for Secret Wars? Now of course, she's not a Thor character or variant, but right now we don't really have a full team for Thor Corps who are a big part of that story as they pretty much act like Doctor Doom's police. So who knows what will happen. Of course, the MCU does adaptations way differently from the comics, but this is something that no one's been talking about and I figured I'd mention it. I mean, we know Bast has at least a small role in the Thor movie also, and there's been some Easter eggs in Moon Knight, so eventually it's possible that these stories do intersect. I actually have a video coming out real soon on this and how it sets up the mantle changes in Black Panther 2, but even Kang, or should I say Rama-Tut, has connections to, of course, not only ancient Egypt, but a scarab from the comics as well. And we all saw that Kang Easter egg in episode 3, so we know that Rama-Tut has had some impact on the MCU. In case you can't tell, I love Egyptian mythology, so anything else that we get connection-wise, I'll be extremely hyped to watch, and hopefully Moon Knight just keeps that going. Let me know your thoughts though on the Scarab and Layla's future in the MCU. You can follow me on Twitter at AnotherMarvelG or join my Discord for daily chats. The links are always in the description. If you like Marvel the MCU, comics, and everything in between, subscribe to the channel. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. I'm another Marvel guy, and I'll catch y'all in a blip.